There's a lot to talk about this weekend, so let's just get started. It's also extremely windy and rainy, so try to disregard any noise that might come from that. But I think we're going to start with Spenser Confidential, which Netflix put out this morning, which is the next collaboration between Mark Wahlberg and Peter Berg, which I've talked about before endlessly, but unfortunately the last time we talked about them was Mile 22, which was their first misstep in regards to their collaborations, because they did Lone Survivor, which is really great, Deepwater Horizon, which is really great, and Patriots Day, which was my favorite movie of 2016. So it's like they kept getting better and better, and then Mile 22 happened, so it was like, there was kind of a lot riding on this one, where it was like, oh, is it easier to be harsher on them now, or are we going to kind of give this one the benefit of the doubt as long as it's better than Mile 22? And I think it's probably somewhere in the middle overall. I think another thing might have to do with, it seems to be the true stories that they work together with really well. Because Mile 22 I think was just a random script, and then this is, Spenser is a pre-existing character, of course. This detective that's been around forever, whose first name we don't know, and it's the movie itself is supposedly based on this book, which obviously started with Robert B. Parker, and then Ace Atkins, who wrote this book, kind of took over as far as the novels went. And they're just like those, small, like this is much shorter than it looks because the pages are so small, but just kind of those novels with throwaway stories that you don't get like overly invested in, but they're basically there as like, a cheap entertainment of sorts. And then that sort of graduated into there were like, I think there were a couple of TV series and then like some TV movies. And then this is the first, to my understanding, like actual movie using this character. And it is an interesting direction for them to go, because I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I would say I'm not sure how it lends itself to Berg's style, but you can see, because it kind of toys with you a little bit, because with some of his choices and the way some scenes are shot or the way some scenes are handled, sometimes it felt like Patriots Day, and sometimes it felt like Mile 22. So that's kind of as far as us landing in the middle. And as far as this book, it is a very, very loose adaptation. Like, the book is called Wonderland, which was the original title of the movie before they changed it. And the plot of this book that it is supposedly based on comes in over an hour into the movie, and even then hardly serves a purpose. So it's an extremely loose adaptation if you've read some of the books, but some of the characters do remain, like Warwick's character, obviously, and then Alan Arkin's character, who's kind of the old guy that lives with him and kind of looks after him, and they kind of look after each other. And Mark Maron's character, who's like a reporter that gives Spenser information. Winston Duke's character, who becomes his partner, is his partner in, like, the other things like the novels and the series and all that. But in this particular book, he's not in it. He's like away in Miami doing something. So, but they went ahead and put his character in it anyway, so yeah. Now, as far as any sort of like adaptation of the character goes, it's interesting because when you think about the character otherwise, I can see it definitely being a Mark Wahlberg part, given the kind of performance, because Mark Wahlberg is capable of multiple types of performances. And when you go by the book, I almost imagine something more like Daniel Lugo in Pain and Gain, kind of somewhat with his characters from the Will Ferrell movies he's done. But he ends up, because he's kind of got like that sort of snarkiness and that sort of smart-ass attitude about him. But in the movie, he plays it pretty straight. He plays it like he's in any other Peter Berg movie, which is interesting tonally, because you would think it could lend itself to going back and forth on that, but he more or less plays it pretty straight, which means most of the movie is played pretty straight. And like any, big action movie, there is going to be, comedic moments in it. Like, there's the relationship between him and his dog, and how it's kind of because Wahlberg's been in prison for 5 years, the dog's kind of started taking to Winston Duke, who's been staying here since he's been in prison with Alan Arkin. And so there's little comedic moments like that. But then there's the character of his ex, who is played by Eliza Schlesinger, I think is how you pronounce it, the comedian. And yeah, I specify that she is a comedian because her scenes are entirely played for comedy. And we're not talking like, comedy breaks in an action movie. We're talking like full-on comedy. And it's like only for her scenes when it goes that far. They even go as far as to try like despite how seriously a lot of this movie plays itself up as, this movie also manages to fit in the comedic sex scene, which rarely ever works in any context, even in full-on comedies. So it's, needless to say, it's kind of all over the place, but I feel like there's more that I like about it than what I don't. As long as you like notice that it's kind of all over the place and doesn't seem like it's quite sure exactly what it wants to do, it's the stuff that works will stand out enough to get along. There's a lot of soundtrack choices, and it's not like the overbearing Suicide Squad kind of thing where it's like there's so many song choices it'll make songs that you like annoying because there's just so many. Some of them work, and some of them are put to really good use. One in particular is Supernatural Thing is used pretty early on, which I really liked because it felt like a callback to Very Bad Things, which was the first movie Peter Berg directed, which is great. But there is something about this movie that's kind of been working in its marketing quite a bit, and it's kind of the typical result you probably expect given how much they're building up this person being in it. And that is, of course, the presence of Post Malone in this movie, making his movie debut. And he's somebody that I've just kind of always rooted for. Like, there's just something, like, obviously he has his famous appearance, but when you actually see him, like, doing interviews or just, like, the videos of, like, his normal life or whatever, despite being filthy fucking rich, he just seems like nothing but... He's got, like, nothing but, like, the good vibes thing kind of going. Like, you just get good vibes off of him. And he just seems like the nicest dude in the world, which makes it really interesting the kind of part he plays in this. Now, when I say it's typical in regards to how they use him in the marketing, yeah, despite how much you may see him in the marketing, he's got 2 scenes. But they're 2 really good scenes, and I would probably go as far as to say they're the best scenes in the movie. Because the opening scene is him in prison with Wahlberg as Wahlberg's getting ready to get out. And the way this scene plays up, he just kind of sits down, and it seems like they're kind of... Like Post Malone's probably playing some buddy that he met in prison, and they're just kind of... He's just kind of talking to him one last time before he gets out. And as this conversation progresses, you realize that he's not one of his buddies at all, but he's actually like a legitimate threat. And to see that kind of progress in the way his character kind of seems really nice to him from the start, suddenly realizes, oh, they might actually kill him in the opening scene. And then he shows back up in the middle to give out information, which is also a good scene. And yeah, I was kind of really relieved for him too, because I was like, I know the dude has already had like a million kinds of success at such a young age, but it's like I still kind of wanted him to succeed in this too. And I think Wahlberg was building it up in talk shows that he really impressed them when he came in to read for Peter Berg, and that wasn't just Wahlberg building it up for like interview stuff and press. I think he could be a really... I'm really interested to see like what else he could do with like a bigger part, because he really sold, especially that opening scene. So that's really great. Even though his stunt double probably gets just as much screen time as he does in that first scene, it's still definitely there long enough for him to make an impact, which I was really happy to see. So, also as far as them jumping around in tone, they do... Well, there is something that I do think, because I thought one of the great things about Patriots Day was how much the tone could have been all over the place, but how Berg knew how to balance out where to put what segments where like he put the sensitivity towards the victims at the beginning and the end, so that didn't have to try to mesh with the really intense stuff that was going on in regards to the investigation. And he does kind of find an interesting balance here also, where the movie's story is kicked off by two murders, two dead bodies. And one of these dead bodies is a really guilty person, and one of these bodies is somebody that's been set up, and that's what Wahlberg is going to try to... is setting out to try to clear his name, is what the main story is. And the way these happen are when the guy that's guilty is killed, it's, like, really brutal, and it's almost like out of a horror movie. It's dudes in masks with, like, machetes. And then when the guy that's not guilty is found, it's this played up as this really tragic scene. A scene right out of one of the tragic scenes in Patriots Day, when his wife finds him in the car, and the camera just kind of pulls out while she reacts, and it just kind of lets the moment happen without being in our faces. It's the opposite of in our faces. It gets progressively farther away from it as the scene plays out. And it's so, like, well done to show, like, the tragedy this is, and it immediately sets up that dynamic of one side of this is super shady and one side of it is was involved in the wrong stuff and shouldn't have been. So, but then when you have a great balance like that, then you have scenes like a chase scene, which is fun. Like, I was kind of thinking, like, it would be almost in tune with, like, the foot chase in Point Break, but instead of that we get Mark Wahlberg getting mauled by a dog for like 10 minutes, and it's like, I'm not even sure if it's supposed to be part of the action scene or comedic. I think it's supposed to be comedic, but the fact that I have to ask means there's probably something wrong. So stuff like that, and the movie, the plot just kind of is like when I was talking about the plot of the book and how it's like barely here when it comes in. Yeah, the movie is just kind of generally unfocused, and it's one of those movies where we see, like, the same scene twice. Like, we have the opening scene right before the first Post Malone scene that kind of sets up how he got in prison and why, and there's kind of a mystery surrounding what exactly was going on. And then as we build up to what that scene meant, they just play us the scene again, and it's like, stuff like that feels a bit redundant, and there's probably subtler ways to kind of go in there and more cohesive ways to kind of feel like it's bringing it all together without the audience feeling like we're just watching what we already know, more or less. It's like, yeah, it's one thing to watch it with more information, but you could at least, cut it up a little more differently or whatever, but it is what it is. So, yeah, so it's all over the place, and I don't know if it's because I want to like it and I want to give them, because I love their first three movies together so much. And it is an interesting direction to go with something that feels with, like, say what you will about the comedy scenes and how they don't quite interact well with the otherwise serious nature of the movie's kind of going for. There's like a lightness to it that works well. Like when you think back to the fact that Peter Berg did The Rundown, and it's like, I feel like if the movie had found more of a balance, it could have been more in line with something like The Rundown, which would have really worked. That balance of the action and comedic moments and all that. But the fact that it gets so serious when it's being serious, and then so over-the-top comedic when it's trying to be comedic, it's a weird sort of mess here. But, yeah, but like I said, it's still, I could easily see it as, like, a sort of guilty pleasure movie. Like, it's kind of the perfect thing for Netflix, because people will watch it, they'll probably get a little something out of it, and then they'll probably completely forget that it exists. But, yeah, so, long story short, they made it better than Mile 22, which obviously was a very low bar, but they did, rise above a little bit, and it's going to be fun to see Post Malone in more movies, which I hope happens soon. So, there's that. So let's go on to Onward. Onward is the new Pixar movie that I went into really not knowing much of anything about it. And there's something I've been talking about pretty much since I've been doing these videos, which is I kind of seem to have fallen out of line with animated movies. Like, there's animated movies that come out that I do really like. Like, last year we had, like, Toy Story 4 and Klaus and stuff like that. But it's been a long, long time since there was an anime movie that came out that I just really, really, truly loved. Like, just really, really took to. When lately I've been coming out of them so sort of indifferent, or like, yeah, it's technically good, but, well, I think I finally found one that I can get, like, super, super passionate about. Probably at least the first one since Kubo and the Two Strings, probably. And this is starts off with like a really interesting idea. Like I said, I kind of liked going into this not knowing what exactly it was, which is this whole opening when it just kind of looks like any other, you know, fantasy animated movie or whatever. Almost brings flashbacks to like the world in Trolls, just a tiny bit. But then as it goes on, it shows off all these really clever ideas about being in this world with like elves and wizards and all that, which usually is the kind of territory that ends up boring the shit out of me for the most part. It's this whole thing where we're in this world where the modern things are somehow in this world where they're like elves living in mushrooms and stuff like that. But it's like wizards are basically out of a job, and like their novelty is worn off, and there's no reason for magic when like electricity and appliances and cell phones come into the mix. And then this eventually progresses into just like the elves and all the other creatures living in like just a modern world that just happens to be in the whole type of fantasy world at the same time. And just that right away, the idea of magic and wizards becoming outdated in a fantasy world is kind of amazing. And so I had heard going in that some people expected this, especially since you've got two Pixar movies coming out in the same year, with Soul also being in like the middle of the year. There's usually the one that's maybe a bit more throwaway than the other, and a lot of people were saying this might be like another The Good Dinosaur for Pixar. And The Good Dinosaur is a movie I really don't care for. It was so derivative of so many movies in just about every way, and didn't have like an original bone in its body, and I just almost completely forgot that it existed until that started getting brought up again. But this is like miles and miles beyond anything in The Good Dinosaur, and a lot of the other animated movies that have come out recently. And because I was trying to figure out exactly what it was, because it was like halfway through the movie when I started to feel like, oh, I feel like this is something more, because they've got an interesting concept. Like, they already have that opening and that whole setup, but then there's the whole idea of they're going to use the magic to bring their dad, who died when the older brother was young enough that he only has like 3 memories of him, and then the other one, the youngest one, voiced by Tom Holland, wasn't even born yet. Chris Pratt doing the older brother, of course. And after they are able to try to bring him back with this staff that he left them after he died, they only can bring him back halfway, and this spell is only going to last 24 hours. So they have 24 hours to find. They have to end up going on a journey to find something that can make them continue this spell. So in the meantime, he's only a pair of legs and like part of a torso. And that's what it is the two of them go on a journey with the bottom half of their dad, trying to bond with him and each other. And this sounds like an idea that would not suit feature length. This sounds like definitely something that was supposed to be a short that was dragged out to feature length against a creator's will, but that's not the case at all. This movie has like so many different ideas up its sleeve for like every scene that happens, and what they're able to do with these dad scenes. When you think that this could only go so far, but then you remember, because we've had so many like of the sequels and some uninspired movies, sometimes you might forget just how far the idea well at Pixar can go, and this was a huge reminder of that. Because even stuff that's like super duper praised, like Inside Out, feels derivative of other stuff. And as I've mentioned before, it's a movie that overall just kind of didn't work for me. So I was really shocked to find that it took 2 elves and their dad that's nothing more than a pair of legs to make me finally say, alright, this is like, we're getting closer back to peak Pixar. And yeah, and so the way they have like those ways of communication with him, despite the fact that he can't see or hear them and there's only half of him there, and they're able to make scenes like legitimately touching just through that kind of thing. And I think another thing that works a lot, that is a hindrance on a lot of animated movies, is the voice cast, where we've got the likes of Chris Pratt and Tom Holland, and I think Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and I want to say Octavia Spencer. And because the thing that is often criticized, and I've often brought up talking about animated movies, is when you have those animated movies with the celebrity voices, more often than not, It's super distracting because all you're thinking about is the celebrity behind the character rather than the character themselves. And a lot of the times it's basically just like a paycheck movie, it seems like, where it's just the famous voice is just sort of droning on with no real emotion. But the reason this works, and I say usually the way to get past that is for the actor to put on another voice and to like actually do voice work rather than just reading lines. But it's not quite that, but it's more about, it's not the fact that they need to change their voices or anything, but it's the way they deliver the lines. Because there is eventually a lot of emotion throughout this movie, but then there's also, it's all about the delivery of the line, because there's so many, like, it's in an animated movie that can be so, you know, big and creative about all the different things it's going to do. It's amazing how much of the comedic moments are through the dialogue and the way the characters say the lines rather than the stuff that's happening. But there's also a lot of stuff going on also that's just as funny. Whether it be Chris Pratt's character shrinking when they get involved with a group of very unconventional pixies. That's just one thing. And then their Minotaur stepdad. Like every scene the movie seems to have like a new idea, and it's like there's so much they probably could have done with just the opening setup of us kind of living in, like, it's a fantasy world, but it's in the modern world at the same time. And that opens up a lot to where you could just take one or two ideas and just run with it. And I think that's another reason the bizarre concept of them only having half their dad on this journey works, because there's so much other things that can happen in the movie also. And that's almost just like every time there's a joke with the dad, it's almost just like a bonus joke after all the other like really great stuff has happened, and the dad ends up being used more for emotional payoffs rather than comedic payoffs, though there's a lot of comedic payoffs to it also, as you can probably imagine. And yeah, they pretty much all work. And that's the thing also about talking about it being like a fantasy elf world inside a modern world that looks a lot like ours, minus like the mushroom houses. There is like, despite the fact that they're elves, the story itself is so human, and I think that really takes it a long way also. And it's got like, there's like up levels of payoff. Like there is like the payoff towards the end of Up. There's a payoff that's hits probably just as hard. And that might seem like hyperbolic to some people who think Up is like one of the greatest things ever. And I do love Up a lot, but and that payoff is really, really powerful. And this one has one that's really great. And the thing too is it's like there's a lot of action going on also, because we talked a lot about there's a lot of animated movies that deal with the fact that they're made for children, and children have short attention spans, so there has to be a lot of action even when it's not necessary. But the thing is even after we've reached multiple emotional payoffs by this point, there is a big action climax also. But even despite the fact that it seems like it may clash with the emotional payoffs we've already had, and that the movie could really end on an emotional payoff and doesn't need to be an action climax. With that said, the action climax itself also is like a stellar climax. It's a really great sort of big finale to the movie. And then even there's even still like one or two more emotional payoffs after that even. And I think it probably helps me a lot having an older brother, and I'm sure anybody else that has an older brother, it'll probably hit significantly harder. But it should still work pretty much on all fronts, I would think, because it's just so well done. Like I said, so human about the way it tells its story and the story that it's telling. About, like I said, really just family in general, because even the mother has some great moments also. But that's really what I take away from this. But yes, it's also very funny, consistently funny, which is really important also. And the fact that it's consistently funny throughout, without always going for big laughs. Like, there are big laughs here and there, but pretty much through the whole movie is a lot of, like, the small laughs that kind of get you almost after the fact. There's a lot of those that I always really appreciate. And it doesn't feel like it always has to be big to get that kind of reaction. And so they balanced out the big laughs and the small laughs and anything in between really well throughout it also. So there's not like an overabundance of either, which leaves more than enough room for when the emotional moments come into it. And yeah. So like usually I wait a week or two to see the animated movies, but I'm really glad I saw this right away. I don't know what attracted me to it, but something, I guess not knowing much about it was like, I'm kind of curious, like what even is it? And yeah, I'm really, really glad to know that now. So there is that. It's also got a really sweet Simpsons short that plays before it also. So that's kind of like a nice appetizer going into it, where it's like it actually serves its purpose rather than just being, oh, here's the animated short that. Sometimes they can be really deep and emotional, but a lot of times they're just kind of a throwaway thing. But this one works really nicely also. So, yeah, this whole thing is just, yes, I'm so happy to be passionate about an animated movie, again, because it's been way too long. So, next, let's go to The Way Back. And The Way Back has a few things going into it. The first thing is, I knew very little about it going in. I knew basically that it was what appeared to be an inspirational basketball story, with Ben Affleck doing the part of the coach that's hired to come in and whip the team back into shape and all that. And all I could think was, well, that's a random-ass movie for Ben Affleck. That's, like, alright, that's random as hell, but okay. A lot of the time, interestingly enough, these movies tend to work anyway. Like, Coach Carter and Glory Road, I talked about not that long ago. You know, like, those Remember the Titans kind of movies in general, just with basketball, obviously. Hoosiers, of course, will come to mind. But obviously there was more to it the more you looked into it. First, the fact that Gavin O'Connor is the director, who Affleck had just worked with on The Accountant a few years ago. And my first thought was, oh, they did The Accountant together and Gavin O'Connor's making it. Maybe that's why Affleck took the role on. And then I learned exactly what the whole plot of the movie was. Because while the basketball stuff is mostly front and center. The basketball stuff is like maybe 2/3 of the movie. Another really decent chunk of it is the fact that this character is battling alcoholism as well. And both these things sound obviously very cliche. Whether you can put these two stories together, or you can separate them. Either way, it's a movie we've seen so many times before. But the thing about it is the whole personal thing that comes into it, with Ben Affleck also being a recovering alcoholic who has since relapsed a time or two very recently, but has since, right now he seems to be on the right track. When he's been out promoting the movie and he looks like 15 years younger than he's looked in the past few years, which is great, and a really great way to go in this movie also, kind of helping it be more inspirational in the process. But I think another thing that makes it really powerful is a story that came out recently, like shortly before its release, was that he had already decided he was going to do the movie, and he could already relate to it pretty well. But then it was like right before they were going to start shooting that he relapsed again, and the studio almost killed the movie because of it. And it was like Jennifer Garner had to step in, and she talked to Gavin O'Connor, and Gavin O'Connor talked to him while he was in rehab. And it became a whole thing. It was like everybody in this behind the movie realized that this movie had to be made, regardless. And you could say, you know, as far as like basing a movie on its own merits, and it's like you could say, yeah, but should outside influence decide whether a movie is good or not? Because you could say like, well, okay, you take Ben Affleck and his whole real life story out of it, and you put another actor in there. Is it a good movie anymore? Or is it just cliche, boring shit? But I think it's a case of sometimes movies are just meant to be the way that they are, and the movie succeeds not only because, you know, Ben Affleck was meant for this movie, but it really feels like when you're watching it, the movie was meant for Ben Affleck. And this is in like the whole blood and veins of the whole movie the whole time you're watching it. And I think that does play a part in it that should be acknowledged and does make the movie more powerful. And like I said, seeing that right now promoting the movie that he seems to be much healthier than he has been makes the movie even more inspirational than it already would have been. assuming he stays in this area. And that's kind of the thing also, is when you go into a movie like this, especially a movie about addiction, and an addiction that can do just as much harm to others as it can to the person that's addicted. And I know a lot of people can look at addiction stories and think it might be hard to root for the person, because when you think of addiction, something that comes to mind a lot would be like recklessness and like irresponsibility. And I can get that. And so you go into a movie like this saying like, why would you want to root for this guy when he just keeps going back to it no matter what? But it is like, it does this, when we watch him, we can see in his performance, like, just, because there's gonna be different, you know, levels of addiction. There might be the people that are reckless and irresponsible because they just don't give a shit. But then you also have addiction stories that are more like, not just Ben Affleck himself, but this character as well, where it's like, there's so much, like, self-hatred in it. Like, when he's relapsing or getting ready to relapse, we can see so much, like, somebody that hates himself for making the decisions that he does, but he's just wired at this point to make those decisions anyway. And no matter how much he tries to deal with the consequences and bounce back from it, and there's always going to be something around the corner that's going to really, really test that. And the more we see those tests and the more he plays off them, when we see him in his prime, when he's like coaching them and they're winning, it's like, if he's going to relapse, it doesn't just feel like another cliche plot turn to add conflict. It's something that genuinely makes our hearts sink when it reaches that point. And that's the emotion that movies like this, you know, strive to reach. And I do think this movie found it, for the most part. But there is, like, what else was I going to say? Because there are the moments, like, about when they're winning. It's also, you can see the cliches in it still, regardless of all this, because you've got, like, you know, they're gonna start off losing, then they're gonna start winning. There's gonna be somebody that's, you know, doesn't seem to give a shit, even though they secretly do give a shit, but they get kicked off the team and they try to get their way back on the team. That storyline that's in every single one of these movies is here. The storyline where he has to, there's one kid that has all the potential but isn't quite seeing it, so he goes to the parent and the parent is dismissive. That whole story is in here, the story we've seen a billion times in all of these. But it's really, and you see these in all these different individual movies, because, like I said, with this formula that, like, in particular, it seems to be basketball movies, in particular, that really take to this particular formula where we see all these different things, is the good basketball movies can carry this formula that we've seen a billion times. They can carry this to the end of the world. They can carry this to the end of times and still make good movies out of it. It really just depends on what's at the center of it. And, yeah, we don't get to know the players near as much in this as we do in some of the other movies like this, because the focus is really on this character's alcoholism and his struggles and all that. And the fact that he's also had troubles in his life, like really tragic circumstances in his life that were out of his control. And that didn't help this at all in any way whatsoever also. And so really making you sympathetic for him in this way makes those moments when they're winning all the more triumphant than they would have been. And, like I said, in a lesser movie you could really see, like, probably the manipulation turning and all that, and then, like, amping up the score and trying to tell you, you know, when to cry or when to be happy and all that. But it all feels, like, really natural in this movie also. And sometimes they have those little moments where, like, they use the same technique, but sometimes it's used for comedy, and sometimes it can be, you know, it could be triumphant, or it could be like a punch in the gut. And that is, sometimes we don't even see the games. We just see they're getting ready, they're building up to the game, and then the final score of the game just pops on the screen. It's like sometimes they've won, and sometimes they've lost, sometimes they've gotten killed, and sometimes they've destroyed. And it's always the scene that backs it up, going right into that moment that decides, is it comedic, or, like, there's a moment when we hear him scream, like, alright, I'm sensing a comeback in the second half, and then the score comes up and they got fucking killed. And it's like and it sucks that they got killed, but the way the scene is, you get, like, it's like a genuine sort of chuckle. Like, it's oh, I feel bad for them, but, you know, it's being light about the problem until it's really depends on his, like, the state in which his character's in. Like I said, really dictates just how triumphant the wins feel, or how much of a loss their losses feel like. And there's a really good balance with that. So, yeah. So, like I said, it can be, you know, formulaic and all that, and you can see all the cliches, but sports movies just have this way. Like I said, basketball movies, obviously, but most sports movies, as long as they're good, cliche. It's almost like you want it to be cliche, if the movie's well made enough. And this has a lot of different ups and downs in it, where it's not all doom and gloom, but it's not all triumphant either. And sometimes when it's not triumphant, it can get really low, and sometimes unflinching, and then other times there is, you know, the triumph of it. So all that, I do think really works. A really, really good last shot, too. I really liked that whole thing also. It's a nice, real, like, piece of closure, that whole scene, and just how well shot it is, so there's that. So, let's go on to the next movie, which is Guns Akimbo. Guns Akimbo is, like, so fucking hardcore. Guns Akimbo is, like, so fucking badass. It's like, this movie goes so hard. This movie is not for the faint of heart. These are the kind of things I probably would have said about Guns Akimbo when I was 12. But turning 30 this year, I don't know what movies like Guns Akimbo are supposed to even be doing anymore. It's because you've got the whole setup that we've seen over and over and over again, from, like, Death Race to the Hunger Games to the Running Man to Gamer especially. Even that piece of shit Nerve from a few years ago, that one with Dave Franco, where it's like, we're going to show how fucked up society is and show society's bloodlust, so we're going to have people fighting to the death for real, and people are going to watch it for, like, and take in the whole internet phase and the going for the views and all, whatever the hell it's trying to say. And it's basically showing off, like, oh, society is obsessed with the internet and it has a bloodlust and all that. Like, it's saying something super profound while also being an absolute culprit in the whole thing. It's where you're just like, yeah, this is one of those movies where they're trying so hard to be cool, and it's like with all the slow-mo, and there's like screamy versions of classic songs on the soundtrack, and it's like the action scenes are edited, especially in the opening, like the editor had the attention span of a gnat. All that stuff going on, and it's like it was made by those people from, like, remember in, like, the early 2000s when the trendy thing in advertising that was, like, out of touch even then was everything was extreme, but it was like X-Treem, those kind of advertisements. I feel like the people that made those advertisements are responsible for this movie. Years later, they haven't grown out of it. They haven't grown out of their extreme phase. So, it's half trying to be, look what society has become, and the other half of it is trying to be the writer-director saying, look how crazy the shit I can come up with. Look how psycho these people are. This is one of those movies where all the characters are supposed to be super crazy, so you have all the... So not only are they wearing, like, masks and shit, or they have tattooed faces, or whatever the hell it is, we constantly have characters telling us how crazy and insane and psycho the other characters are. And it's like the kind of self-congratulatory bullshit you see in Rob Zombie movies, which is not a compliment at all. So this is a movie where there is a character named Fuckface. That's the kind of movie it is. I feel like that honestly speaks for the whole thing. I feel like I just went through saying that Polar was the worst movie of last year. This literally feels like a companion piece. This feels like Polar all over again. And the director's styles are even similar. Like, you had the guy that did Polar is the guy that did, like, Spun, which is a piece of shit. I know it has a cult following, but I think it's a piece of shit, personally. And then, of course, you've got everybody. Neveldine and Taylor need to make a comeback because everybody is fucking robbing them relentlessly. The guys that did Crank and Gamer and all that stuff, Ghost Rider 2 even, I'll defend that movie and its craziness, sure. Everybody wants to be crazy like them, but they had something going. Hardcore Henry, you can throw into this also. Hardcore Henry... I've said this before and I'll say it again. Neveldine and Taylor should have sued the makers of Hardcore Henry, and they probably would have won. And you just get this try-hard bullshit. I never liked this movie for even a split second. Thankfully, it's only like an hour 35, but the pacing is so incredibly horrible because it's trying to constantly be in your face. This is the kind of movie where after we get the really cringe-ass opening with all the slow-mo and the rock songs and the shooting and whatever, the car chases that are really badly edited, we get Daniel Radcliffe coming in and he's like, hey, I'm just a normal guy that got involved in this, doing the narration and shit. And, like, even him just walking to work and narrating, we're assaulted with imagery where he's surrounded by, like, text messages and emojis and shit as he's explaining what's going on. And it just doesn't let up. And movies like this, movies like Neveldine and Taylor movies, like Crank and Gamer, are great because they never let up. Just those movies that deal in excess. Like, you could go as far as to say even the better times we've seen Michael Bay, when he just goes full-on excess. That kind of thing can work and can make a movie fucking nuts and insane. And this movie is trying to do that every second, and I'm sure it'll work. I'm sure there are people that walk away from this movie that haven't seen the better movies like it, that think this is one of the craziest things they've ever seen. But it is just so... and I think... I hate to do this to the actors involved. This happened with Catherine Winnick in Polar also, where it sucks to blame the actors, because you know how much they're being encouraged off-screen. And it's probably really cool and freeing to play parts like this. Well, Samara Weaving is playing our villain, who is this psychopathic killer, they describe her over and over and over again, who goes around, she's got, like, no eyebrows, and her thing is to be kooky and crazy, and she's all about cocaine all the time. She shows up with the shootout with Daniel Radcliffe for the first time. She's still got the straw or whatever it was that she used to snort cocaine still up her nose to show, oh, she's so crazy and whatever the fuck. A loose cannon, whatever the hell they were trying to do. And they were probably telling her off camera how cool and badass she looked. And it's just... It is relentlessly... I hate to overuse the word cringe because it's so overused as it is, and everybody thinks everything is cringe anymore, even when it's not. But I honestly don't even know what other word to use talking about the Samara Weaving character in this movie. It is like, her entire character is the whole personification in itself of the cringe factor that is this movie. And it's of this whole thing. And it even gets to a point where she has to sneak into, like, a police station to look up where Daniel Radcliffe is. And so, being Samara Weaving, looking like Samara Weaving, the only way she sneaks into this place is by putting on a fake mustache and sunglasses. And it's like, I get them trying to be over the top and it doesn't matter because it's all kooky and crazy or whatever, but I mean, the second I saw Samara Weaving in that fake mustache, I was like, oh, this movie isn't just, like, magnificent cringe or try-hard bullshit or trying to be balls-to-the-wall action or anything like that. It's just flat-out fucking stupid. It is just so fucking shamelessly dumb, and not in the good way. We talked about Spenser Confidential a few movies ago. That kind of dumb, I can see. This is... I don't want to say anything that would offend anybody, but very, very, very high levels of just stupid fucking bullshit, we'll say. without throwing around any offensive terminology. But this is also one of those movies that's so, you know, trying so hard to be frenetic that the guns have to be going off constantly. So this is one of those movies that's so... And I can maybe get this in another movie, but I mean, it becomes annoying after a while. This is one of those movies where for every 1 million bullets fired, one person will be mildly wounded. That in itself can probably set up just how obnoxious this movie is and trying so hard to be as badass as it possibly can and just never even coming close to reaching any levels like that. It comes to a point where Samara Weaving said a line that I could not believe I was hearing. All the things I just said about Samara Weaving and her character, there is a point in time where she says to Daniel Radcliffe, "I'm embarrassed for you." And it's like, it's funny you say that, Samara Weaving. I was just feeling the exact same horrible feeling for you, and I'm so sorry. And like I said, I hate to blame the actors, because, like I said, this is probably the kind of role that people, you know, dream about having, where they can just say, you've got a big-ass gun, you're crazy as fuck, just do whatever the hell you want. But this is not the kind of movie you want to roll like that. At all. Like I said, you might be cool to some 10-year-olds, but that's as far as it's going to go, unfortunately. This movie is so fucking dreadful that Rhys Darby is in it, and Rhys Darby cannot even save his scenes. The brilliant, hilarious Rhys Darby from, like, Flight of the Conchords and Hunt for the Wilder People. He has one scene in Hunt for the Wilder People that had me bent over in tears in fear I was going to die laughing. And Rhys Darby cannot save his scenes in this at all. So this means that your movie is fucked beyond repair if Rhys Darby can't help you. So this... And there's even... And talking about everything looking stupid and being stupid, there is a running joke where the villains in this movie look so fucking dumb that characters keep commenting on it. And it's like, what do you want to do? You keep trying to tell us how crazy and badass you are, but you also keep it's like they're trying to have some damage control by being somewhat self-aware, but not really. Because it's like, instead of saying like, oh, they're self-aware, it's like, yeah, no fucking shit. I'm glad you finally noticed your characters look fucking stupid. And then it's obviously this whole thing also about, like, going after trolls. Like, the whole thing about Daniel Radcliffe's character is he's angry at trolls, and that's what gets him into this whole mess. And it's like trolls in a chat room and all that. And then you look at, once again, we just talked about Ben Affleck in The Way Back. Let's go back to real life coming into movies. Now, I didn't really look much into this, because honestly I didn't give a shit, because it's like, somebody made themselves look like a fucking idiot on Twitter. Oh, it's another day. Go figure. But apparently this dude was not only, you know, embarrassing himself on Twitter, but he was using the movie's official account to do it. Because apparently his account had been suspended because of whatever he was doing or something. And it's like, yep, it sounds exactly like the kind of guy that made this movie. And it's like, not only did it get him in trouble on Twitter, it got him in trouble because now it got everybody in trouble because this movie exists now. And anybody that this movie is in the vicinity of is in trouble because of this movie's just flat-out existence. I'm sitting here right now, and describing the movie means that anybody watching this video on the internet knows that I have seen this movie, and that embarrasses me. I don't know what else to say. And then, and on top of all this, it's got a fucking climb. Oh yeah, I was talking about before about the movie's only like an hour 35, but with all of this going on constantly, it feels like it goes on fucking forever. It feels, and then we get to a climax that goes on and on and on and on and on, and eventually they bring hammers into one of the final fights. It's like bringing hammers into one of the final fights. You are not the Raid 2. You will never be the Raid 2. You will never be in the Raid 2's shadow, because you and the Raid 2's shadow are not even in the same universe. And then that whole cocaine thing has the dumbest fucking payoff you can possibly imagine. So, that's also... There's like a billion things in this climax, and they're doing nothing but driving the points home of what made this movie bad, and amplifying them at every turn. So, that's what Guns Akimbo is. You notice I've said Daniel Radcliffe's name as few times as possible. I guess I was trying to keep him in, like, the witness protection program or something. He's doing what he can, and it's so interesting to see the kind of movies he does. I don't care for a lot of them, unfortunately, but the fact that he's making these sort of career decisions, it'll always be interesting to see what he does next, and that he's willing to throw himself entirely into something. Still makes him exciting, regardless of if a lot of the movies he's done lately are ones that I don't personally care for. So, keep doing what you're doing, Daniel Radcliffe. But every now and then, no matter how appealing it may look on paper, I don't even know how this is going to look appealing on paper, to be honest with you. But maybe every now and then make some turns away from stuff that's should so obviously have seemed like shit from the get-go. So, yeah. So let's end on a movie that's totally in the same vibe as Guns Akimbo, Emma. So Emma is... for some reason, my mind keeps wanting to call it a remake of the Gwyneth Paltrow movie. Obviously, it's another adaptation of the Jane Austen novel that we've seen many times, up to and including a modernized version, which you might know as Clueless. But as well as Clueless, I recently talked about the Gwyneth Paltrow version, probably about a year or so ago. I did a video with it and Pride and Prejudice as a whole Jane Austen thing. And I like that version quite a bit. So I unfortunately was kind of doing a lot of comparing when I was watching this, just kind of unintentionally. Like, I don't like to go into movies that are another adaptation of something and do that. But yeah, these are besides Clueless, the Gwyneth Paltrow version is the one I know the most. So it's as far as the Paltrow version being the year after Clueless, it was sort of like they sort of advertised it with like a sort of modernized way about it, and like the way the characters behave, and even though it's definitely like a period piece and a Jane Austen story and all that, just sort of the feel of the Gwyneth Paltrow version felt somewhat modern in the way it was about itself. And while this one does take the full period approach without necessarily trying to modernize it in any way, or try to do like maybe like a Sofia Coppola kind of thing, it fully embraces all the period detail, but there's a liveliness in it that has been missing from adaptations like the Gwyneth Paltrow version. And so you see this in like particularly the production design and the costumes just really are like so bright off the screen. But not only that, you get stuff like Bill Nye playing her dad, and even his entrance into the movie, like his grand entrance when he comes down the stairs, just gives the whole movie like this really vibrant feel about itself, which is kind of the best way period piece like this can go, because unless you're like really, really into this genre, which I'm not, it can be very easy to look like pretty much any other movie of its kind, or feel like any other movie of its kind. And sometimes you just get a flat-out weird one in the best possible way, like The Favorite, that just really kind of turns it on its head. Or you get like a Sofia Coppola that adds like the weird modern things into it, like the shoes of Marie Antoinette and stuff like that. But here, the fact that it's able to kind of have that feel, like that almost Sofia Coppola feel, without having to do anything particularly modern, really makes it stand out in an interesting way, especially within the genre itself. But like, I also love the way, talking about the production and costumes are the easiest things, obviously, to compliment about a period movie. but it's the way they sort of... They're usually seen as like a separate thing, but it's the way they complement each other, I think. And like, there's a couple of scenes in the beginning and in the end where Bill Nye sits in his chair, and it's like because of his costume and the chair itself, he like practically blends into it. And it's just like, it really makes everything stand out in this really great way. And as far as the technical aspects of it go like that, it was really working for me in the way it kind of had that lively feel about it. But if there's one thing that I thought was kind of holding it back a little bit, and I think this might be like a totally minority opinion, so try not to get mad. I'm just throwing this out there as what I was thinking. But apart from stuff like, we have Bill Nye as her dad, and we've got Mia Goth playing Harriet, which is a really sort of... It works unexpectedly, because Mia Goth has been playing like these really ominously mysterious characters for a little while, like The Cure for Wellness or Nymphomaniac and stuff like that. And to see her as like... to really go after Harriet's like naive innocence is something that she does like so well, and it seems so suited to her. And where like, if this had come out first, it would be really jarring to see her in her roles like A Cure for Wellness and Nymphomaniac and stuff like that, because she embodies all this so well. And then there's Miranda Hart, who plays Miss Bates, who obviously is a character that is just more or less kind of a background character in there for the comedic value until there's the big turning point when Emma insults her. And I really loved the way Sophie Thompson played her in the Gwyneth Paltrow version, the 1996 version. But Miranda Hart kind of does something a lot different from that one, but still has the same feel, and also just works in this really great way in itself without comparing it to anything else. But I think apart from those three, Mia Goth, Bill Nye, and Miranda Hart, the new cast wasn't really working for me. I thought for the most part they were just kind of boring. But the thing, mainly like the side characters, like the guy playing Knightley or the guy playing Mr. Elton and stuff like that, just kind of felt like, you know, nothing particularly. They felt a bit generic, especially the scenes with Knightley, where they should really be like, the scenes between him and Emma should really feel like, as they're going back and forth, they're like constantly provoking the flames of a fire, which we do get that vibe in the '96 movie quite well also. But here, while it should feel like that, the more those scenes happened, the more kind of repetitive they started to feel, rather than increasingly more electric like they probably should have. But that's to bring up the lead, of course, Emma, Anya Taylor-Joy, who I have talked about before, who I do like a lot, just sort of in general. And the thing that's disappointing about this, though, is that she really is the perfect casting choice. Like, it's not the fact that she's miscast in any way whatsoever. She really definitely could have killed this and really owned this part. And to my understanding, she's gotten a lot of acclaim for it, so it worked for a lot of people. But there was just something disappointing about it, where it was almost... There was a lot more, I guess, I don't want to say lifelessness, but you could get the sense of the Emma character was like right on the tip of her tongue, but I never felt like she went all the way there with it. Like, it just felt like she found a general outline of the character, and that's what it feels like through a lot of the movie. And it was especially this one when we get to the kind of turning point scene with when she insults Miss Bates, and then, you know, he confronts her about it, and we really see Emma kind of have to confront herself. And she's finally reacting in a way that we haven't seen her before. And this cry scene that Anya Taylor-Joy has, I don't know if that's one of the scenes that really works for people. That I felt like that was especially a misstep that didn't quite... it feels very abrupt, and like there's sort of... Like, I always remember like a gradual feel to that moment, when it's kind of something that has to dawn on Emma before she reacts to it. And it's, like I said, kind of a turning point. Really towards the end of the story. But her crying almost felt like put on. Like, it almost felt like... It didn't feel like Anya Taylor-Joy was badly crying. It felt like Emma was fake crying. Which I wasn't quite sure how to take that either. So Yeah. And then there's other moments where it was like, sometimes I just couldn't help. Because some scenes in the 96 version are just so well done. Like the scene with Elton in the carriage after the party when he's confessing to her and she realizes this has all been reversed the whole time. And it's a great scene with Gwyneth Paltrow and Alan Cumming when the camera stays in one place and they keep going back and forth in the carriage while he's like confronting her with these feelings. And it's like sometimes they're like right in our face and then sometimes they move back and so on. And it's a really well shot scene. And it just kind of amplified the blandness that it kind of felt in this movie. But just, there was no particular inspired way a lot of the scenes were shot, and it just sort of feels, like I said, the fact that the cast didn't, have even close to the fire of, particularly, an actor like Alan Cumming. Whoever's going to play Elton in this had a lot to live up to. And the way, and it almost sort of becomes bizarre. Like with Alan Cumming, you got the vibe that he was like, he kind of had like this almost childish way about him after being rejected when he just kind of walked away in a huff. But this Elton has like that childlike outburst that makes the character like creepier than he's probably supposed to be. And then that's the kind of the vibe I got from kind of the actor and the way he was playing him throughout the rest of the whole thing. And it just felt kind of bizarre. So, so I do feel like, I kept feeling like there was something lacking after a while. Like that first half hour, so or even 45 minutes, I was like, alright, I'm into this and its style and the way they're doing it. But then as it goes on, I kind of felt like the life kind of started to drain out of it, and there was just something that wasn't quite there. But there is enough here that I didn't mind having seen it. Like it didn't like completely do irreparable damage to itself as it went on. I just feel like it didn't quite have the life it did as it went on. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I just felt kind of underwhelmed by the cast. Like I said, that seems to be a minority opinion, so I'll just have to live with that. But it is nice that a lot of people are taking to it, because it is nice to kind of see a period movie kind of try to do something a little different in regards to bringing itself to life, even if it can't fully sustain through the whole thing. So, yes. So, I think that's what this week is going to be. Next week, I don't know. It's like, I feel like there's a lot coming out, but I don't know what exactly I'm even interested in, but I'll get that figured out in time. All I'm thinking about is the week after, as you can probably guess. So, all I want is for A Quiet Place 2 to be here. That's all I give a shit about. I don't care at all what comes out next week. Everything that comes out next week is just in the way of the week after. So we'll see what happens there, though. And I will be doing another Versus, and that'll continue to be the weekly thing again. So until all that stuff, I think we're done here.